like to welcome our guest speaker this afternoon, who is Lachlan Wetherall. Now, Lachlan needs very little introduction. He is a local historian who has the most wonderful website, which I very frequently end up looking for information on. It's called A Bit of This, A Bit of That, and I'm going to read the little subheading of it: Local history, life, technology, and other random stuff, handcrafted using the finest naturally occurring binary digits. Which tickles my sense of humour, and by the sound of things, yours as well. Lachlan also writes monthly for The Local, which is this great little publication which comes out once a month, and you don't have to look too far to find an article by Lachlan, which the information, of course, goes onto his website as well. But very interesting reading. The one for this month is all about the Lancers in Lambton, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'll certainly be doing that very shortly. Now, this afternoon, Lachlan is going to speak to us about dating and locating historical photographs, something which I'm sure most of us have come into contact with over our family history researching over the years, and it's wonderful to have some expertise in just what to look for and how to find out what the photographs are and where they are. So welcome, Lachlan.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you today. And I just want to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet on. I'm going to be speaking to you today about dating and locating historical photographs. A little bit about me. I recently retired after working for 40 years in the electrical engineering and information technology field. So my background is not in history. I have no academic or professional qualifications or professional experience in that area. And you'll notice on the slide here, I describe myself as a community historian, and that's because I have had some practical experience in terms of researching local history over the last 10 years. And so I'm writing articles for The Local every month. Mentioned before, there's my article for April, and that'll get a little bit quick mention later in this talk. So over the last 10 years, I've written 118 articles for The Local, and most of the articles are in the format of a historical photograph, and a story about that, and then a modern photograph of the same scene to give a then and now perspective. And as I look back over those 118 articles I've written, and those that have used an old photo, I discovered that there's about a third of them where I was, in the course of researching them, I was able to more accurately identify either the location or the date of the photograph. So why do I care? Why do we care about location and dates of photographs? Well, it's not just my intellectual pedantry that's involved here, although that certainly is involved. But once you date or locate the photograph, that often also leads you to understand the occasion of the photograph, what's actually happening. So knowing the date and the location can help you actually understand what's going on. So in this talk, what I'm going to do is going to give you some examples of some photos that I've researched in the last 10 years where I've located or dated them a bit more accurately. And I'm going to give you some tips on how I was able to do that and how it's led to a greater understanding of the content of the photo. Now, this talk I'm giving today is inspired really by a talk given by Johnny DeGravia of Newcastle University back in 2021, Tips and Techniques for Dating Historical Photographs. Still available online. If you don't like my talk, you can go and check out his later. Johnny's talk covered more, it was more wide-ranging in terms that he was looking at things like looking at photographic media and cameras and processes and looking at the provenance of photographs and accompanying information, etc. In contrast, what I'm going to do today is going to be a bit more focused in scope, in that what I'm going to be doing is looking at how do you date or locate a photo simply by examining the contents of the image. Now, a word of warning before we get stuck into this is that giving advice on dating and locating photos is a bit like giving tips on how to raise children. Because there is no methodical step-by-step process to success in raising children. I mean, you can't talk to your friends and family and say, oh, if you want to raise happy, healthy children, just do A, B. Well, you can do that, but you just annoy them. No. When it comes to raising children, giving tips, all you can do is give examples of the things that you found helpful in certain situations. So in the talk, I'm going to be looking at 8 photographs principally. Most of these are Ralph's snowball photographs, so they're not all of them. And as I go through each of these, I'm going to be giving various tips, which I'm going to put on a screen like this. And then at the end, I'll have a slide which summarises all tips that I've given. Anyway, photo number 1. The Ralph snowball photo. Crowd of dressed up people walking away from the photographer on some sort of rail line there. Now, I first came across this photo 11 years ago on the University of Newcastle's Flickr site, where at that time it was captioned, "The view from a train at Singleton, ND, not dated." So here we have a location, but no date, so we appear to be halfway there. But are we? Because here's my first tip, and this is the biggest tip of the whole talk. Question everything. Because previously published information might be wrong, even information from reputable sources. So, 11 years ago, a commenter called Robert wrote about this tip of question everything, and he suggested that this is probably not Singleton, but probably Lambton. So that Robert, who I didn't know at the time when I first came across this, turned out to be this fellow, Robert Watson. Hands up, you know Robert? Yeah, good. So Robert questioned the Singleton, I guess it was Lambton. And this comes to my next biggest tip, which is how to date and locate historical photographs, is to work with a good collaborator. So Robert's become a good friend of mine, and a lot of the photographs in this talk, he and I collaborated on and had discussions back and forth, and particularly this first photograph that I'm looking at today. So the thing with working with a good collaborator, you get to share ideas, you get to seek suggestions from the other person, and even if the person can't offer any suggestions, sometimes just the mere act of trying to explain the problem that you're having to somebody else, just having to formulate those thoughts or put it into an email, sometimes that in itself is enough to trigger something, some insight, which advances you closer to the solution. Okay, so why do we think this photo is in Lambton rather than Singleton? Well, here's my next tip, which is to compare your photograph with other photographs. And in particular, by identifying buildings or landmarks that are the same in different photographs. So let's go to another Ralph Snowball photograph from October 1900. This is looking from basically where Russell Road, New Lambton is, back towards Lambton across Lambton Colliery. And if we look at up there on the hillside there, I'm going to focus in on that area there and then zoom into it. And there's a number of buildings there. And I'm going to pick out 4 of them and colour code them there. Now, if we move that to the side, so that's a photo which we know is Lambton. We bring it back over here, and it's gone off the screen a little bit there. If you look carefully, you can see that those 4 buildings are on the left-hand photo also appear in the right-hand photo, which is the one of the people walking on the tram line. So we're pretty confident that that photo was located in Lambton, not in Singleton. Now, another way we can confirm the location of photos, one which I use a fair bit, is to use a tool like Google Earth Pro. It's a free download. You can download and store on a computer. And I use that to usually to try and confirm my guesses by comparing the topography, that is the shape of the land, where the hills are, where the valleys are, where you can see creeks and things like that. It's not often good for being the primary means of identifying something, but it's often useful for ruling out a wrong guess. So I've had photographs where I thought, oh, this could be this place, I've brought it up in Google Earth, the same, what I think is the same view, and I go, no, it can't be that place, because if it was that place, I should be seeing a great big hill there, I should be seeing a valley there. So let's give it a quick try here on our where we think is in Lambton. Here's 3D view in Google Earth. And move that to the side, bring up our photograph that we're investigating, and the Google Earth view is a little bit distorted, but you can see the shape of the what's Lambton Road at the top, curving around, Hobart Road down the bottom where the tram tracks are. The shape of the horizon is approximately right, and so it doesn't prove it, but it is another little bit of piece of evidence. And as I say, I use Google Earth quite a lot for kind of just testing out theories. Okay, so next tip is to try and date a photo by looking at datable infrastructure. That is, we want to look for buildings, utilities, objects, anything that you can date from another source. So you want to be looking at things like tram lines, train lines, bridges, street lighting, telegraph lines, curbing, anything that you can look at and go, maybe I can find out when that was installed, maybe I can find out when that was taken away. And that's going to give you some guidelines. So let's come back to the snowball photo we're trying to date and locate. Here is a portion of it. Now, when you look at that there, can anybody see anything in there which might help us for dating? Any infrastructure?
Street lighting.
Street lighting, yep. Anything else people can see?
The length of women's dresses.
Length of women's dresses.
The
Yep.
church.
And there's a church. Yeah, so those are the two things I want to focus on. Is number one is the church. And over on the right-hand side, I've got a photo from a different angle. We know that's a photograph of St John's Church up here in Moorhead Street. And we know from just looking up other sources that this wooden church was replaced by a brick building in 1907. So the fact that we can still see that building on the left-hand side means that that photo has got to be before 1907 when that wooden building was demolished. So the second thing, which somebody pointed out, is the street lighting, which is electric street lighting. You might not be able to see it, you can see the wires coming down from the top of the pole. And we know that electric street lighting came to Lambton in 1890. So the fact that there's electric street light there, those two, and the church there, we know the photo is in the range 1890 to 1907. But the question remains, what event is being photographed? And back to about 10 years ago, when I was trying to figure this out, I left a comment on the Flickr page saying, there were so many people out and about, my guess, and it's only a guess, and I'm glad I qualified that, my guess is based on other photographs from Snowball series of photographs, that this was the celebration of the commencement of electric lighting on the 9th of the 9th, 1890. Because there's other photographs of that day where people were wandering around dressed similarly to that. So, as it turns out, that was a wrong guess. It was a good guess based on what I knew at the time, but it was a wrong guess. And what I'm going to do is going to circle back to that photograph at the end of the talk and narrow down the date, and that's going to identify the occasion as well. But for the moment, let's move on to photo number 2, which is another rail snowball photo. Again, this was from the university's Flickr site, and it was captioned, "Construction of the Water Reservoir, New Lambton, 1917. So here we have both the location and a date. Job done, right? Well, no. Well, and also there is a Trove article, a newspaper article, confirms that there was a Lambton Reservoir, New Lambton Reservoir, constructed in 1917. But remember my first tip? Question everything. Previously published information might be wrong. Because with this 1917 water reservoir up in New Lambton, that's still there up on Lookout Road. It's that front reservoir, all covered in vegetation at the moment. So the problem with that, when we compare it with our Snowball's photograph, is it's a different shape, it's a different size, it's a different construction technique. It's above ground, whereas the one in the photo was underground. It's a different topography. That is, if you look at this photo here, the land is kind of stretching up flat behind these reservoirs. Whereas if you look at Ralph Snowball's photograph, the land is dipping away sharply right behind the reservoir. And obviously there's a modern steel reservoir behind the old one. That's clearly not the one photographed by Ralph Snowball. So it's not the New Lambton 1917 reservoir. How are we going to identify which reservoir it was? Well, here's another technique I use quite a lot, is to use old maps. So here's an old map from 1940 of the Newcastle area. And on this map, it actually has helpfully marked the water reservoirs with little blue circles. It's a bit hard to see in full scale there, but if you look up, I've expanded a bit on the top there, and it has little blue circles marked with reservoir. So over here on the main map, I'm highlighting there all the places on that map that had a water reservoir marked, which was up on a hill. So they're the possibilities. So let's go through them one by one. Which one could it be that Ralph Snowball photographed? Okay, so the first option is the Lachlan Reservoir, which is in the top of the hill as you drive up from Jesmond Park, and it's basically buried underneath that mound up there. It matches the underground construction technique, but it's kind of the wrong topography. As in, when you look behind this photograph here, if this was Lambton, we would expect to see Lambton township behind us, behind that in the background. You'd expect to see streets and buildings, whatever. It's basically empty until you look away in the distance. So it's not Lambton. What's our next option? Well, there's a water reservoir in St James Road in New Lambton. It's highlighted up there. It's underground. You can just see the kind of the concrete cover of it there. So could it be St James Road, New Lambton? But again, it's the wrong topography. The land doesn't slope away enough, and it's like Lambton. If Snowball photograph was of this reservoir, we would expect to see buildings in New Lambton in the photo, and we don't. The next option is New Lambton Heights. So that road going sort of down there, you see is Lookout Road, the main road, and you can see two modern steel reservoirs there. Ignore those; they're fairly new. But in the middle, you can see a sort of circular grassed area, and there is, I believe it's still there. It's not used, but buried underneath there is an old water reservoir. That one is kind of like the right topography looking out over. But the problem there is it's the wrong date, because that underground reservoir was constructed in 1926, but Ralph Snowball died in 1925. So that doesn't help us. The next option is Merriweather or Glebe Hill. So that's Glebe Road running horizontally across there. And on this map, which is Barrett's 1910 map, which you have a beautiful print of it on the wall over there. It's one of my favourite maps. It's marked on there. How does that go? Well, it's an underground reservoir, like Snowball's photograph. It's got the right topography, so the reservoir is on a ridge where it slopes right sharply behind it. Further confirmation by comparing with other photographs. What I've got up there is you can see two chimney stacks in the distance, and they match up with, one's tall, one's short, and they match up with where you would expect to see the two stacks of the Broadmeadow copper smelter, which is located where Finninans is today. So here's a Google Earth view, and you can see that water reservoir is still there under the ground in somebody's backyard there up in Merriweather on the hill there. When you go up there and have a look at it, it's the same size, it's the same shape, it's the same construction. So it's a very good candidate for what Ralph Snowball photographed there on the left-hand side. So, having come to a reasonable guess that this is the Merriweather or Glebe Hill Reservoir, what about the date of the photo? And here's my next tip, which is to say that once you've located a photo, sometimes that will then assist you with dating the photo. And the converse is also true. If you've dated a photo, that sometimes can give you enough information to go and locate it. And in this particular case, once I suspected it was the Merewether/Glebe Hill Reservoir, I could then go to Trove, search old newspapers to find what I could about that reservoir. And that throws up an article, the construction of that Glebe Hill Reservoir, and it describes it as the roof is formed of two concentric arched rings and a dome carried by cast iron girders, supported by iron columns resting on some foundations some 2 feet square. And so you can see those construction details that match up there nicely. The columns and the concentric iron rings. So with this photo, we've moved from the wrong location and wrong date through to the right location, Merewether, and the date of 1886. Okay, photo number 3. Another Ralph Snowdall photograph, this time of New Lambton Council Chambers. So where exactly was it in New Lambton? Because this building burned down in 1931, so we can't cruise the streets looking for it. Well, returning to my tip about old maps, that's going to help us in this case. So what sort of old maps do I use all the time? I find old street directories, old UBDs and Gregory's can be helpful. National Library of Australia online has some maps which I've used. State Library of New South Wales, it has increasingly maps available to use. Newcastle University Living History site has quite a good collection. And I particularly want to point out the 1890s waterboard maps that the Hunter Living History site has. So here's an example of a waterboard map, and it's this is of the New Lambton area. So they're all just sort of black and white sort of line drawings, but they've got incredible detail with all of the property boundaries, where the buildings were. And if we're focusing on that the middle section in there, and if I zoom into that there, you can see it says in read diagonally, New Lambton Municipal Council Chambers. And just as an aside, because I love these maps for the detail they have in it. Look at the stairway, the stairs at the front. It shows the stairs there, it even shows the shape of the stairs. And you can find a photograph of the chambers, and you can go, oh yeah, those stairs were that shape. Okay, so we've located it on the map. How do we find where it was in real life? Well, what I often do is I'll get the map and I'll overlay it into Google Earth, so you can sort of see in the background the sort of that aerial image of New Lambton. There's the council chambers there in the middle, and when I line all that up, I'll have to work out exactly where that was. It's where this early childhood centre is now on 297 Lambton Road, New Lambton. And before it was a early childhood centre, it used to be the bowling, RSL club.
Oh, with bowling.
And there may have been a bowling green there as well.
There was.
Yep. But it was there. So after the building burned down, the council chambers, they the council then used, I think, a house next door. But then, of course, the New Lambton Council dissolved in 1938 when Greater Newcastle Council was formed. And at that time, this property went into the hands of the RSL. Okay. So photo number 4. This is a Lambton photograph. Thomas Bevan, undertaker, cabinet maker, carpenter and joiner. We know it's Lambton, but whereabouts in Lambton? What street? What address? This building doesn't exist anymore, so how do we find out where it was? One of the things I find useful is looking at land titles. Like who owns land where and when? Now, this is the Historical Land Records Viewer site. This is very complicated, requires lots of practice to use, and it would take me another entire talk just to get started on how to use this. So I'm going to have to skip over all the complicated part of how I arrived at this land title. So trust me that I got there. And so we're looking at a land title there for Lot 6, Section K of Lambton Township. And on page 2 of that land title, we see a transfer annotated there for the 5th of July, 1889 to Thomas Bevan of Lambton, carpenter. And so by matching up lot 6, section K, we can see that that is in Pearson Street there, number 41. Yeah, and there's just a house there now. So I just want to point out a few of the limitations of using land titles. Firstly, it may not help if the person you're interested in own multiple properties. So if Thomas Bevan owned 6 properties in Lambton, that wouldn't have told me where his undertaking business was. It doesn't help if the land or building you're looking at was rented rather than owned, because land titles refer to land ownership principally. This is often a problem with you're looking at trying to locate hotels, because often the licensee or the lessee for hotel, they didn't actually own the land that the hotel was on. So that's a limitation. And so because of those 2 limitations, using land titles is usually more helpful as a confirmation of a suggested location rather than a primary means of locating. So quite often I'll go through a process of all the other techniques of trying to work out where a building was located. And then as a final step, look at the land titles. And if I look at the land titles and go, oh yes, the land title shows that that person owned the building at that time, it's kind of like an extra confirmation. And again, I'll remind you that the records viewer is incredibly hard to use. So I have one tip for how to use the historic land records viewer. And my one tip is make friends with someone who knows how to use it and get them to do it for you. Okay, so let's move to photo number 5. Okay, audience participation time again. Here's a photo of the building in Waratah. Can anybody tell me what that's the photo of? Any other guesses?
Like a quarry, but
It kind of looks like a quarry in the background. It is.
is it a church?
That's what people usually say. It looks like a church, but the first guess, I didn't see who did it, was right. It's actually an incinerator. It's a garbage incinerator. And the reason why that building looks so beautiful and kind of looks church-like is that building was designed by Walter Burley Griffin, who was the architect of the city of Canberra. After he got all the fame of that, long story, he went into a firm and designed a number of garbage incinerators around the place. And I believe there's still one of them down in Sydney. It's still standing. This particular one is not standing anymore. It was demolished about 1950. So how do we work out where it was? Well, my next tip, and one that I use quite often, is make use of historical aerial photographs. There's 2 main sources I use for historical aerial photographs. There's a New South Wales government website called New South Wales Historical Aerial Imagery. If you just Google that, you will find it. I can't give you the URL because it consists of about 60 random characters. And the other place I go, I should mention that New South Wales site covers historic imagery from 1943 up to about 2001. The other place I go to is Google Earth Pro, which there's, when you install that up in the toolbar, there's a little kind of turn back the clock button there. And if you do that, you can then sort of cycle back and look at old imagery. And that tends to cover imagery from about 2005 to present. Okay, so returning to the Waratah incinerator, I'm on the New South Wales Historical Imagery site. With this site, it's just for New South Wales. Some places in New South Wales has no imagery whatsoever, particularly once you get out into regional areas. In Newcastle, we're quite well served. For whatever reasons, there is actually quite a lot of imagery of Newcastle suburbs dating back to 1944. So here's the 1944 aerial photograph of the Waratah area. And I'm going to focus in on this area here, zoom in, and we see on the bottom left-hand corner a building there, which has got something tall on the roof, which is casting a long shadow. And you can see when you kind of compare those, you can see the sort of gravelly road in front. You can see the tall chimney stack is what's casting the long shadow. So that's matches pretty well. Where was that? That was on Bray Park, slopes of the Bray Park Hill near High Street, just near the Moreira nursing home. The incinerator ceased operation around about 1940 and it became derelict and was demolished about 1950. Okay, photo number 6. Again, another Ralph Snowball photograph. This one's in the Newcastle Library's Hunter Photo Bank collection. And at the time, updated now, but at the time, it was just simply capturing bush scene. Where is it? What hope have we got at locating a photograph just called bush scene? Well, for this sort of thing, I use a method called guess and test.
What a strategy.
Okay. That's where you make an educated guess and then you test to see if it matches. So it's a bit like doing a cryptic crossword sometimes. I know some people here like cryptic crosswords. So usually when you've got a cryptic crossword, you look at the clue, you think about the clue, and that leads you to the answer. Sometimes the clue is just so cryptic you've got no idea. So what you have to do is you kind of look at the grid and go, well, I know this word would fit in. How does that word fit? Does it fit the clue? So you kind of guess the answer first and then see if it matches the clue. You get the idea. So here's a sort of close up of one area of that photograph. Can we make any educated guesses about? Actually, I'll go back to this photograph. Does anybody want to make any guesses as to where they might be?
Is it Glen Rock?
Okay, I'm glad somebody said that because that was my first guess. Because focusing in on here, I could see that there's a gully. It's a wooded area. There's these big flat areas of rock at the bottom of the thing. And I know that in Glen Rock there are those big flat things. So my first guess was, oh, is it Glen Rock? So there's my guess. What about testing it? How well does it fit? Well, the problem is that it doesn't fit really well because in that photograph, the gully is fairly broad and shallow, whereas in Glen Rock it's quite a steep gully. Also, it's a lot of clearing in the Snowball photograph, whereas Glen Rock was tended because of the mining there, it wasn't really clear. The photo shows a lot of sign of development and various structures in there, which kind of doesn't fit with what I know of Glen Rock's history. And in fact, when we look at Snowball's photograph and start to focus in on the details, we notice things like there's stairways with a handrail, there's a wall, there's a path. Down the bottom here, we can see nicely formed rock walls. Up on the top there, we can see some sort of shed. We can see a little footbridge going over a little creek there. At the bottom, we can see fences. We can see fruit trees planted in neat lines. That's not Glen Rock. So where could it be? So my next guess was, could it be Bull's Garden in Whitebridge? So have anybody heard of Bull's Garden?
Yes.
A couple of people. Yeah, so I only knew about it because Mike Scanlon wrote a piece in the Newcastle Herald about it some years ago. And so I thought, how well could it be possibly Bull Garden? And that certainly fits the test out pretty well because with Bull's Garden, it dates back to 1875. So it's down in the Whitebridge area. Edmund Bull purchased 60 acres of land, which I've highlighted in red. So that's his 60 acres of land. And then with the help of his 7 sons, he began to plant, clear the bush in that green area to make it into a scenic garden that people would come and visit and have pleasure trips to. And there's a newspaper article which describes the garden and what sorts of things he's doing and matches very well with what we see in the photograph. So that's a pretty good guess. Can we narrow it down? Can we confirm it a little bit more? Well, here was the clincher for me. It comes back to one of my previous tips, which was aerial photographs. Again, focusing in, this is the Snowball photograph, bush scene, this sort of little rock ledge here. I went to New South Wales Spatial Interchange Maps, 6 maps, and there's an aerial photograph from more than 100 years later, and I'll just have to use the mouse here to point out a few things. I'll get the mouse to work here. So we can see a sort of a straight line there, and it ends up there. If you look down here, you can see that same straight line, and it's bending up there. You can see a big flat platform here with an overhang. Here's a big flat platform with an overhang which is casting a shadow. And if you look up here in this big flat platform, you can see like a very sort of shallow kind of ridge line running along the middle. And you can see that same ridge line just going along there. And if you look more carefully, you can, the more you look at it, the more correspondence you can see. So that was pretty much clinched it for me that yes, this photograph, which was labelled bush theme, is actually Bull's Garden in Whitebridge. Date, work in progress. I'm only guessing about 1890 based on when Edmund Bull purchased the thing and sort of vague reports out when he started clearing it. 1890 plus or minus 10 years. Okay, photo number 7. This one's not a Ralph Snowball photograph. We know it's Broadmeadow. It's etched on the photograph. Does anybody know where that is? 9 Ways. Yes, that's 9 Ways Broadmeadow. So that building in the background behind the tram is the Premier Hotel, an earlier incarnation of it. And it's a bit hard to read, but up there I followed Herbert's Theatre in London. So we know the location pretty exactly. Here's the modern scene, obviously huge building there, but the Premier Hotel is still back there, different building, but you know, the same hotel. So, what date is this? We know where it is, but when was it? Well, remember my tip about datable infrastructure? What might help us with this photograph? There's a tram line that will help us.
When the theatre was built? When the theatre was built? Okay, they're the 2 things I'm going to work with you. So firstly, we know from trade newspaper articles that the construction of this brick version of the pier commenced in 1923. There was an earlier wooden building there. We know that the brick version, which is from 1923. So we've got a start date. Somebody mentioned the tram. The tram line was there from about 1900, I think. But the key thing is that that tram line was electrified, and electrification was completed in January 1925. And so this is the case of what we don't see in the photo. We don't see any overhead wires. So the electrification hasn't happened. So we now know this photo was taken sometime 1923 to 1924. Okay, but can we identify a more exact date? Well, this brings me to my next tip, which is to pay attention to advertising and signage. So things like signs on shops, advertising posters, road signs. So coming back to our photograph, this is the movie theatre. They're going to be advertising movies. In fact, on the column on the right-hand side, what's on the left-hand side, there's 2 movie posters. I'll expand that out there. Okay, can anybody make any sense of that?
Something to. Is it Gladys somebody? No?
Okay, you're going really well.
Yeah, I think it's the girl who, something.
Star pupil, okay? So it is the girl
The
who.
cataract operation.
Okay, but how can we confirm this? Okay, so we've got some idea that this is we know it's a movie being advertised. I got through this, the key is I identified, I made a guess that, I made a lot of wrong guesses, which I'm going to take you, not bore you with, but I eventually guessed right that it was the girl. I couldn't make out anything else. So I went to the Internet Movie Database to the advanced search page, and I started to search for all the movies released in 1922 to 1944. I had to go back to 1922 because the film might have been made in 1922, not made it to Australia until 1943. And just as an aside, does anybody have any idea how many movies and shorts were released every year in that era? Anyone put a number on it?
4,000.
Oh, that's pretty close. It was about 3,000. 3,000 every year. Fortunately, having made a guess that it starts with the girl, I could narrow it down, search for movies in that time period starting with the words the girl. Bingo.
Oh.
Thank you very much. It's Gladys Walton starring in the girl.
It was Gladys.
And when we bring up the photo there, it all makes sense. You couldn't make out before the bath, you can just make out the shadows of the girl hunched over the bath. Yeah. Okay, so now we know exactly what movie was being advertised. Next step is go to Trove, find when that movie was running at Herbert's Theatre Arts in Broadmeadow. Doesn't take too long, found that there. There it is, it's running at the Lyric Theatre and at Herbert's Theatre at Broadmeadow, Islington. And that movie only ran for 1 week, Monday the 17th of September 1923. So we've gone from date of 1923 to 1924 and got to a particular week in 1923.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, I got a good one at the end of that.
Can you tell us who the man is crossing the street?
Take that question on notice. Okay, photo number 8. We're back to Ralph Snowball.
Oh.
Now, does anybody recognise this location?
Yeah. Tower Street?
No.
No. What?
There's the rotunda.
Yes, is the Park Rotunda's up there.
Yeah.
So that's actually Moorhead Street.
Yeah.
And so the you can't see it, but you can see sort of a little entrance way up there in the fence line. That's the entrance way into what would have been the council chambers, which is now the library. So this is the photograph looking down Moorhead Street, and it was originally captioned "Centenary Bicycle Race 1898." So we know where it is, unambiguously. We've got a caption saying it was in 1898. That raises a question, and I mentioned the rotunda up there. Centenary of what?
Yeah.
Because the problem is that the centenary of settlement in Newcastle was in 1897, not 1898. And so some sources, some sites on the internet actually has this photo captioned as being in 1897 because of that. And just to add to confusion, I found some other places where this particular photograph is captioned as being in 1889, which I presume is somebody with dyslexia. But we have 3 different dates and we don't know what the occasion is. So how do we get to the bottom of this? So here's my next tip, and this is the tip which is particular to Ralph Snowball photographs, which is negative box listings. Because when Ralph Snowball stored his glass plate negatives in big wooden boxes, he put on the top a slip of paper and wrote a summary of short description of the contents. There were usually 12 glass plate negatives in each box. And Newcastle University Special Collections, when they scanned Ralph Snowball's photographs, they also scanned the negative box listings and made them available online. So here's 3 examples from Ralph Snowball's negative boxes. And if anybody's interested, I've kind of made an index of those, which you can find at that URL. And when you look at my index, you can click through to the actual images on the Newcastle Uni site. So just do the negative box listings help us for this centenary bicycle race? Yes, they do. It's here's box 179. And in the middle there, we see an entry labelled Centenary Bicycle Run. Which just goes to show he might have been a brilliant photographer who wasn't so great in spelling. Okay, so what do we know about this when this was? Well, at the top of the box listing is the start date, October the 6th, 1898. And down the bottom, he's listed the date of the last negative in there, October 13th, 1898. So we now know, narrowed it down to one particular week. So now that we know the exact, well, pretty much exact date, we know it's between there and there. We still have a question that's centenary, what's the occasion? But now we can go to Trove and see what it was about. Now here's my next tip. Well, it's really a revisiting an old tip. When I said question everything, because previously published information might be wrong, also include in that the photographer might be wrong. So when I go to Trove and search for bicycle-related events in that particular week of October 1898, I come up with this. It wasn't a centenary race, it was a century race. But it wasn't a race celebrating 100 years or something. It was a race raced over 100 miles. Went from Newcastle Post Office up to Stroud and back. And because that distance wasn't quite 100 miles, they had to detour out to Lambton to make the distance up to 400 miles. And that's what you're seeing photographed there outside in Moorhead Street. And when you read, this is only part of the article. When you read through the whole article, basically all the details match up in terms of the number of riders there, the time of days, which you can gather by the shadows. You notice there's some women riders there in their full-length skirts. Well, kudos to them. They all made it. 100 miles to Stroud and back in those dresses. I'm impressed. So now we've gone from a cycling centenary race to a cycling century run, and we know the exact date that was taken. I promised I'd come back to this photo number 1 of the people standing on the tram tracks. When we left at the beginning of the talk, I got to the point where I made a guess that it was the electric light opening in 1890. Now it turns out to be a wrong guess, and we found out it was a wrong guess because remember my tip about question everything. Previously published information might be wrong, the photographer might be wrong. The most important one of this is you might be wrong. Your own previous conclusions might be wrong. And that was the situation in this case. So the tip that got us, Robert and I, through to establishing what this photo was by looking at unusual details in the photo. That is, there are some photos, if you stare at them long enough, you sort of see kind of odd little details, which you go, oh, I hadn't noticed that before. What's that doing there? What does that mean? So here's a close-up of one section of the photograph. There are 2 things in here which were the keys to unlocking this photograph. You'll not even see anything in there which you think is unusual or
New South Wales flags.
Okay, the flags, that's one of them.
Flowers.
A
lot of those, like there would be like flowers in their hair.
Flowers in there. They're pretty well dressed up, they are.
Yeah.
That is interesting. It's not the one I'm looking for.
All the children.
There's a lot of children. That's kind of part of it. And what do you notice about the adults in that photo?
A lot of women.
A lot of women. And that's what, so years later, Robert kind of emailed me basically mentioning these 2 details. Firstly, the flag, you mentioned the flag, but I'll come to that in a moment. But he noticed that there's a lot of women in this photograph. And I thought, I'm a numbers man, I'm going to quantify this. So I took the photograph and I just put little coloured dots on everybody. Red dots on the women, blue dots on the men, green dots on the boys, purple dots on the girls. Add them all up across the whole photo, and here's the results. Now, the one I want you to pay attention to is the top one, the adults. 25 men, 69 women. So the women outnumber the men almost 3 to 1. So what does that suggest?
It was a women's event.
Women's event, possibly?
Suffrage.
Maybe suffrage?
Some church event, maybe they must be more.
Yeah, well, there's lots of church events, but typically the men and women are involved to some extent there. If the men are not there in the photograph, where might they be? They're working. So that's the thing that occurred to me, is that this is so few men there, they're probably off at work. So this suggests that this is a weekday event. It's a weekday event, it's possibly a school event.
Yeah, but there's a lot more girls than boys.
Come to that. Well observed. Okay, so my thinking was, weekday event, is it a school event? And somebody knows the flag, the school is waving it, and that is the New South Wales state flag. And so this is possibly a New South Wales, a public school, like Lachlan Public School event. So what sort of event would a public school have on a weekday? Well, they were really into their picnics back then. We know that there's the photograph is capturing a view from a train. So we know we're in Lambton, we've got a train, we've possibly got a school, maybe it's a picnic. Search for Trove for those 4 words, and bingo, we come up with this. The annual picnic at the local public school took place at Toronto on Wednesday and was largely attended by parents and the general public. A train of 7 cars left the Lambton Colliery Railway at 9 a.m. containing about 500 children and 400 adults. That's massive. 900 people travelling with a train to Toronto. And as a final confirmation here, in the Newcastle Library Hunt photo bank, there's a photograph, a group photo, which was taken by Ralph Snowball on that day, captioned Lachlan Public School picnic at Toronto. So we know Ralph Snowball was at that picnic at Toronto. We know that he lived only a few hundred metres away from where that photograph was taken. He's clearly travelled down on the train with them, travelled on the train back with them. As they disembarked from the train, about to go home, he's stood up either from because the train, the Colliery Railway went across the railway bridge over Howe Street and Lambton Road. He would have been up there looking down, taking a photograph as the people walked away. So now we know where it was, Howe Street, Lambton. We know the exact date. We know the occasion, returning from the Lambton Public School picnic. Now, somebody mentioned the girls. So there's more girls than boys, and you can sort of see that with all the lovely little white dresses that the girls are wearing. My theory on that is that back in that day, they wouldn't let girls and boys travel together in the same carriages, would they? So the carriages would be turned up, all the girls would be let off first, they would go walking off, and the boys would have to wait their turn at the end. I'm pretty sure that's why there's the discrepancy between boys and girls.
Have you decided what street that is in the background?
So that will be going up there will be Durham Road. Yeah. Yeah, and the tram line there is where Hobart Road runs there once then they took away the tram line in the 1950s or whatever it was. Okay, so here's my kind of final summary slide with all the tips that we've gathered so far. Question everything. Find a good collaborator. Compare with other photographs. Use Google Earth. That's something you're into. Look for datable infrastructure. That's a really key one. To make use of old maps. Remember that once you've located something, that helps with dating and vice versa. Make use of Trove and newspaper articles. Land titles if you're able to. Historical aerial photographs using the guess and check method. Look for advertising and signage. The snowballs. Use the negative box listings. And just pay attention to all the unusual details in the photo. And that's particularly true for Ralph Snowball photographs. They're such high resolution that you can zoom into those and find things that you never expect to find. So that's all for the moment. I've got some time for some questions, but after questions run out, I have a quick fire round, 3-minute quick fire round at the end, a little bit of extra. So I haven't quite finished with the slide, but now's the appropriate time to take questions.
You just very politely said overlay maps. And I was thinking, but maps are in all different sizes.
Yeah. It's more of an art than a science. But in Google Earth, when you up in the toolbar, there's a thing which says overlay. You just click on that, and you can bring in an image, a photo, or another map. But when you bring it in, as you say, it's going to be the wrong shape, it's on the wrong size, it's the wrong position. And Google Earth has the ability, you can sort of drag things around, you can rotate it, and it's just trial and error. You kind of get to, and then you have to try and, there's no automatic way of doing it, you kind of have to pick out. So if I'm overlaying a map, I'll look for a significant intersection of two roads, and I'm going to I'll position that there, and I'll try and drag it around, resize it, and then when you do that, it's sort of back and forward until you finally get it.
Thank you.
Oh, the cars make it easier?
They can do. I'm not a car expert, so it's often not helped me. And typically the photographs I've been dealing with is kind of pre-car era. I know there was one photograph of Rankin Park Hospital, which had a car in front. My father-in-law, who's passed away now, he was a real car nut, and so I was able to show him that photograph, and he would admit, don't remember what I said, he looking at it, he says, oh, that's a 19 blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, right, that fits in with where I suspected the photograph was taken. Yeah.
But well, I'll ask a question about using Google Earth and locating a particular location using coordinates that you've got from another source, whether they're on a map or whatever. I can't, when I do that, I find I get about a misclose of 40 metres or something like that consistently on Google Earth. Have you used coordinates, converted that and gone to the spot with any success?
Yeah, yep. And it really depends on the quality of the coordinates you've been given. You know, somebody might give you coordinates, GPS coordinates, but you don't know how accurate. Sometimes you don't know how accurate that is. So maybe it's off by 40 metres because they only get to give you the good precision, or maybe what they measured, their device wasn't that accurate. And so particularly like everybody's got a GPS in their phones these days, but that can be off 10s metres, 30s metres. It really just depends. So yeah, don't rely on the accuracy. Yeah, use that as a guide. So if there's no more questions, can we switch to get my PowerPoint back on, and I'll do my quick fire round, which is basically 5 more photographs very quickly going, kind of applying all these tips that I had on my last slide. And if any questions arise out of this quick fire round, you can talk to me afterwards. Okay. So, and this comes to the question before, that the bicycle photo, where it was taken from, would have been taken from the top, the balcony there, because that's on the, basically where the coffee shop is there now. So that's Con's store. When was that photo taken? How do we figure that out? And Robert was involved in this. Well, I came down to looking down there in the gutter, having our minds in the gutter, because when you look down there in the gutter, you notice it's a big kind of open, deep gutter. And there's reports in the paper from 1888 that was replaced with a covered underground gutter. So that dated that photograph to about 1888. Electric light power station. I was originally able to locate that by using the very distinctive double gable on this power plant building. Looking at other photographs of Langton and seeing that distinctive shape and identifying that staying up 398 Newcastle Road. This is a postcard labelled Nellie's Glen, New Langton, popular picnic spot around about 1900. How did I locate where that was? Well, discovering that that building up the back there is not a picnic shelter, but it's actually an engine house from Langton Colliery. If we zoom in, you can actually see 2 cables, like a cable that's going out from the winding shed from the engine, and it's going across to a shaft on the other side of the gully. Cables would go down into the mine and be used to pull the coal skips. And so, having established that the cables were there, I was able to wander around Jesmond bushland, find both the remains of the winding shaft and the engine house, and identify exactly where that is in the gully that comes from John Hyden Hospital down to Langton Gardens. This photo here, an army encampment at Merriweather, so that's looking out over in the distance of Shepherd's Hill. So Newcastle City is behind that sort of big gas container over there. Where exactly was that? The key to unlocking this one, the exact location of this, was working out that this kind of hill that the photographer's standing on is not a natural hill. It's actually the slag heap or the spoils heap, the AA Company's Hamilton pit. And I was able to locate that spoils heap on one of the 100 waterboard maps. And therefore that identifies that this location is pretty much smack bang on the intersection of Glebe Road and Stewart Avenue. And lastly, and this is the subject of the photograph in this month's local article, Maitland Lance's camping in Langton. A Trove article that Robert found quickly identified that the site was adjoining Langton Colliery, but where exactly? Well, by comparing with other photographs, in particular, there were 5 features in this photograph that got me to the endpoint. So there's a house A, there's a white picket fence B, there's a double rail wooden fence C, there's a gravel track D. It's a bit hard to see, but E is kind of like this little squat shed with a sloping roof. And by looking at other Langton photos, we're able to identify all those features and work out exactly where it was. And in particular, that little squat shed, I found in another photo, exact same shape, size, orientation, location that I was expecting. And that confirmed that photo is basically on Turner Street, the ridge that Turner Street on. And interestingly, up until quite recently, the same house was there. That house just in the last 12 months has been demolished and moved to a new house. So that's from Google Street View underneath. But I kind of quite like that photo. That is unconditioned. It's almost like they knew that this Turner Street was down there. But it's not surprising because basically it's the very top of the ridge. And as I walk around there, because I live quite close to there, and as you walk around, you realise that it's the only flat spot in that area where you could reasonably pitch tents. The other spot is on the side, on the slope. Okay, so that's me done. If you want more information, that's my website, lachlanwetherall.com.
Oh, thanks so much, Lachlan. That was just fascinating. Yeah. A real process of deduction, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I can see you love rabbit holes like other family historians do. Thank you, Lachlan. That was just brilliant.